Hello, and welcome to today's show, Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Burgess, international leadership expert and trusted advisor. Welcome to Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. I'm so delighted that you joined me today. I have a very special guest on our show. His name is Ari Weinzweig. Now, just a few years ago, Ari was named one of the world's 10 top CEOs by Inc. magazine. Ari is the CEO and co-founding partner of Zingerman's community of businesses. Now, that's a mouthful. This community of businesses includes Zingerman's Delicatessen, Bakehouse, Creamery, Catering, Mail Order, Zing Train, The Coffee Company, Roadhouse, Coffee Manufactory, Events at Corman Farms, Miss Kim, and Zingerman's Food Tours. Wow, that is quite a community. Zingerman's is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And you know, those of you who are regular listeners to this show, I'm just going to say, go blue. That's one of my hometowns. Now, Ari was recognized as one of the who's who of food and beverage in America by the 2006 James Beard Foundation. He was also awarded a Bon Appetit Lifetime Achievement Award among his many recognitions. Ari is also a prolific author. He has written a number of articles and books, including Zingerman's Guide to Good Eating, Zingerman's Guide to Giving Great Service, Zingerman's Guide to Better Bacon, and Zingerman's Guide to Good Leading, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. And each of these books have a unique focus. In this 4-part series, there's building a great business, being a better leader, managing ourselves, and the power of beliefs in business. And all of Ari's books take the perspective of what he calls a lapsed anarchist. A lapsed anarchist, that's right. Now, you will hear more about what that means during our conversation today. Today's topic is humility and leadership, a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I can't think of a better person, a better leader, a better human being to address this topic than Ari. Now, I met Ari in person just recently when I was in Ann Arbor attending to Family Matters. But we actually met virtually before that through my sister, Vera, who connected the two of us via email. Now, when I met Ari through his amazing newsletters and very attentive emails, and then when we finally had an opportunity to meet face-to-face right outside of his Zingerman's Roadhouse restaurant, I heard him speak so passionately about his business and his team, and he was just on fire about it. So I can't wait to host this incredible, humble human being, my friend and colleague, Ari. Now, before I bring Ari on, I want to take just a moment, to connect the dots between today's topic on humility and leadership and legacy living. Now, there are many, many ways that humility and leadership connect to legacy living, which you will hear more about later. But for now, let me say that legacy living is a way of being and a way of living and moving through the world so that we make the conscious choice to be the difference we want to see in the world. We make the conscious choice now, right here, right now, not in some distant future. We make that conscious choice day in and day out, 365, 24/7. Now, more about that a little bit later. Let me introduce you to my friend and colleague, Ari Weinzweig. Welcome to my podcast, Ari. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to make sure that the listeners get a chance to hear your voice before I start launching into questions.
Well, I'm honored to be here with you, Gloria. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So, Ari, we are talking about humility today. And I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about how you think about humility, what it means to you, and how you have come to this place around humility.
Okay, well, I'm going to be humble and say that was probably more questions than I can remember, all of them, but I'm going to try to start with the last one and then work my way back to the earlier one. So you guide me if I get off the rails. But so how I got started on this, I mean, clearly I know the word. Uh, I've read a lot of books in my life and written a fair few, and humility is not a new human concept. But the way I really started to pay attention to it was the 4 years ago, this coming spring, I got asked to speak at a little symposium on campus at University of Michigan that was about humility. And my initial reaction when the kind woman reached out to me to speak, and I speak pretty regularly, as do you, but my reaction was, I really don't know anything about humility. I mean, I clearly, like I said, know what the word is, but I've never spoken on it. I've never written about it. We teach a lot of classes internally. We have a whole training program called Zing Train, and we have, I don't know, 12 at the time, 12 2-day seminars.
Mm.
None of it even deals with humility. And I'm like, I'd love to help you, but I don't really know anything about it. But my challenge was that the woman who had asked me used to work for us, and she's an awesomely wonderful, kind-hearted, generous human being. And her husband still works for us, and he is an equally kind and generous human being. And I just didn't have the heart to say no. So I said yes. And then I figured, okay, I got 5 months or 4 months, whatever it was, to figure out what I'm going to say. And so that's really what got me to start to study it. And like pretty much anything, and given the diversity of your studies, which is wonderful and inspiring, I'm sure, I'm going to guess you've had similar experience, but almost anything I believe that one starts to really pay attention to, it becomes very interesting. So whether I've read a book on the history of trains, which is completely not within my normal area of interest, but once one starts to study it, it becomes very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happened with humility. And so I gave the talk, but then of course I kept going, and I started to study it more, and I started to realize how more and more how important it was to healthy leadership, to healthy organizations, to a healthy life. And then I started to look, and we'll get into it, but to the implications, both positive and then unfortunately negative, of what it can do to our communities and our societies when it's lacking. So that's really how I got going. So I'm going to pause there and let you ask another question so we can hear your wonderful voice too.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ari. So you basically followed an invitation from a speaking opportunity at Michigan and followed that trail, and you became more and more interested. And you have actually written on this topic. You published a slew of books and many, many, many pamphlets. And you have a pamphlet on humility, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. It came out last fall. This is the culminate. Well, actually, I'm still learning, but at the time, it was the culmination of the work that I had done that started with that invitation to speak. It's called Humility, a Humble Anarchistic Inquiry. We can talk about anarchism later if you want.
Yes.
It turns out to be, I mean, it's something I've been studying for a long time and working hard on its application to progressive business and to sustainable life, I guess was a way to say it. But this is really just a summation of my learnings and how, like I said, how I came to get focused on it, and then what it really means, how I realized in hindsight why Jamie Vanderbroek had asked me to speak, which is that although I had been completely unconscious about it, we were actually doing it in a healthy way within the organization. And I started to understand how we had woven humility into so much of our existing training. We just didn't call out the word. And then also, I started to realize how important it was for leadership skills, and really an important piece of the hiring and training and job expectations. And then lastly, I ended up with some different perspectives on what humility is and how to frame it in a meaningful way.
All right. Well, so you think about humility at the intersection of leadership, at the intersection of organizational effectiveness, ecosystems, but I don't want to get ahead of you. So I want to just let our listeners know we're going to go there and talk about those different aspects of humility from your perspective, Ari. But for right now, can you just give like one or two examples of people that you would consider to be humble leaders in your own life?
Wow. Well, one of the interesting things, so Patrick Lencioni,
Hmm.
whose works I know you know,
Hmm.
uh, has a book out called The Ultimate Team Player. And he distills his research down to three characteristics that one ought to look for to find the ideal team player: humble, hungry, i.e., the pursuit of mastery or greatness,
Hmm.
and what he calls smart, which doesn't mean intelligence, but more uh, emotional intelligence or the ability to work collaboratively with others, etc. And when I read those, I realized that actually those three characteristics were essentially true of everyone I had really enjoyed working with over the years. And so some of those include partners of mine. So Paul Saginaw, who I started Zingerman's with back March 15th, 1982. We're going to have our
Mm.
39th anniversary next week.
Wow. Congratulations. Yeah.
Kind of crazy. Maggie Bayless, who's the person with whom we started Zing Train. She fits that bill. Frank Carollo, who I had worked with when I was a dishwasher in restaurants, and he was a line cook and started the bakehouse with us, all the way on through to really most of the people I could think of that we work with as leaders in our organization. There's so many, and then also people who've inspired me through philosophical learnings and teachings around the world, many of whom that's how I connected with you, is because we share
Yes.
a lot of those. So people like Peter Block, um, Maya Angelou, people, I just was quoting Toni Morrison and for the e-news I'm working on today. I mean, all of these people, I got Bell Hook's book on love at the top of my stack. I mean, they're all people who are coming in their own imperfect ways, like all of us, from places of humility. And
Hmm.
so I think really who's not humble, and I don't say this to place blame, but I mean, it's the people who act full of themselves. And I have come to believe mostly that comes out of their own internal insecurities and anxieties, which we all have, just that's how they deal with it. And uh, in my experience, it's not the most wonderful way to manifest it in the world.
Yeah.
But I believe most of us have the same anxieties. It's really and the same self doubts. And um, I'm trying to remember her name. I was just listening to a wonderful scholar did an interview uh, with Brene Brown, and she was sharing her own anxiety as a Black woman who had achieved. She's written a wonderful book and great achievement, and she was talking about her self doubt. And I'm thinking I have the same self doubt, and I'm
Mm.
39 years in business, in a world renowned business with whatever we have 550 employees. And I still feel that doubt every day. I feel like I'm falling short, and I don't know if it's legit. So I really believe it's a universal truth. And then what we can learn to do is to manage that anxiety in a healthy way.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Ari. So I am wondering if you can paint a picture for our listeners. I read a quote, and I don't know if this is your quote or somebody else writing about your work, Ari, but it talks about Mozart and music.
Hmm.
And it
Yeah, I
says,
wrote it.
Mozart once said that music is not in the notes, but in the silence in between, and
Yep.
that humility is analogous to that, in that humility is the space between the sounds. And I love that image. And so I'm wondering if you might talk about either yourself or one of your colleagues or somebody else that you mentioned and how they manifest that space between the sounds. I mean, it sounds poetic and lyrical and lovely, but what does that really look like on the ground?
Well, I think in a way it's a funny thing, but it actually doesn't look like anything. That's why it's the space between the sounds. It's it's part of what has happened in the world, and I don't know that it's really new, but I guess it's probably been exaggerated and exasperated in recent years. It is those who make the loudest noise get the most attention. And I think humility by definition means that, of course, there's times for us to speak, and of course, there's times for us to, in quotes, make noise through our actions. But sometimes, many times, oftentimes, it's really through our silence
Mm,
and our ability to keep our mouths quiet and
mm,
to let others step forward and lead, to ask better questions, uh, and to watch as others develop and grow and learn to struggle and collaborate as we are, because we're all struggling.
mhm,
But I mean, I grew up in a loving family where they showed love and affection by cutting you off and telling you were wrong. And it wasn't ill intended. It was not a bad, it wasn't ill will. It was just habit, routine,
mhm.
way of relating. And so that's how I grew up. So I'm, with all due respect to my family, I'm kind of in recovery from that, because I can get triggered with the best of them and learn and
Mm,
start to just react and
mhm.
talk louder and faster. And it's not the end of the world, but it's not great. And so just learning to slow
Yeah.
myself down and back up, and then, as you described, to as is in the pamphlet, to live in the silence between the notes and
Mm,
just let things unfold, not to be absent or to abdicate our responsibility, because as leaders, the responsibility is the same whether we're listening or we're talking, but to really allow others to come forward and shine. And I was actually just while I was out running today, listening to a podcast with Krista Tippett and a gentleman who I had not heard of
mhm,
named Gordon Hempton, Hempton, who's
mm,
it's about silence. And
mm.
he studies silence out in the world and goes out and listens to nature. And it just, I was thinking about you. I was getting ready to speak to you, and so I was thinking this is a perfect segue for it. And with your musical background, of course, I'm honored that it resonated for you, because anybody who does what you do in the musical world as well as you do, and your husband does, understand this really even better than I do.
Well, thank you. As you were talking, I was actually thinking about music and conducting, which is one of the things that my husband does. So thank you for that. And I will look up that podcast. Sounds wonderful. Sounds very interesting. So, Ari, what have you learned since writing the pamphlet? I mean, you kind of started out wondering about it, and as a learner, what have you now pulled in as a result of finishing that?
Well, quite a few things, really. I'll start with a couple and we'll see where we go with that. But so one big one was, I before I had started this work, I think it was clear to me, of course, that people who were very full of themselves and who were not able to ever sit in the silence, but needed to be the noise in the notes, not the silence between the notes.
Mm,
That clearly people, when, and we all have ego, when we get caught up in that ego and we take it to a exaggerated state to dominate others, either emotionally or in some cases physically or politically or spiritually, and in very bad cases in an abusive way. Uh, Clearly that's not humility. I would not have said, though, that people with very low self-esteem are unhumble, because I would have thought, well, clearly they're not egotistical, so they must be humble. But I came to, through my own readings, to change that belief and to really understand that humility is about neither being high nor low. And from that, a second learning that came to me was really starting to believe that humility is when we're at our most human,
mm,
is when we're in a state of what I came to call humbleness. And
mhm.
I can talk about that too.
Yeah, I would love to have you say more about that. At our
Yeah.
most human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a number of pieces of that. So when we're neither overly full of ourselves nor stuck in the state of self-deprecation, and certainly I can run my cycles on both ends of those
Can't we all?
extremes. Well, I think we all do. That when we can stay centered, and it's not that easy, when we can stay centered, that's when we're true to ourselves, and that is when we're at our most human, imperfect, uh, open to learning,
Mhm,
frail and fragile, yet resilient.
mhm,
And so a lot of it comes out of that. And then I started to also look at the root of the word. which I do often. I'm sure you do
Oh,
also,
yes.
because it's always interesting. And then you mentioned ecosystems, and this connected with work I've been doing on, in a way, a different subject, but of course everything in the ecosystem is related one way or the other, and this turned out to be too. But so humility comes from humus, from the earth. And of course, in the Bible, Adam, the first man, that his name in Hebrew, Adamah, means earth. So,
Mm.
and of course, the story in the Bible is that he was created by God from the earth. So, regardless of one's religious beliefs is not the point, but it's just that it comes from that same place of groundedness and connection to nature and connection to the earth. So it really came out of that. And that the humus, the topsoil, the most important piece of what plants grow in is the humus. And in the same way, the most important thing, or one of the most important things for growing healthy people in organizations, is also humility, because without the topsoil, plants don't grow well. Without the humility, people don't grow well.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. You must have been reading my mind because I went to that root word too. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So, Ari, can you talk a little bit about what humility has helped you understand about the state of our country right now?
Yeah. I when I started this study, I didn't really realize at all how important it was going to be in the context of what you just said, of understanding the state of society, not like the society, and I'm a part of it, so I'm not looking at it as an outside critic. We're all part of the problem, and we're all potentially part of the solution. But I didn't know when the pamphlet was going to come out, it was not planned as some sort of massive social statement and commentary. It was just work I'd been doing for a long time. But a couple of very current event related subjects that are at hand. So one is, if we're in a state of what I now would refer to as humbleness, and we can come back to that in a bit, but if we're in a state of humbleness, we're not better than anybody, and we're not worse than anybody. And this is going back to the ecosystem. In nature, there's really no hierarchy. Everyone and everything is important.
Mm.
We're all different. We all play an important role. In the moment, one person's role might be different as the conductor of the orchestra. If I'm in the audience and I go to the bathroom, nothing's going to happen. If you do, the show's in big trouble. Doesn't make you a better person or me a worse person. It just means in that moment you have a
Mm.
particular importance. So it's not. This is not to deny that important role that you play, but it just to not tie value as a human being to the role people are playing, or of course to age, gender, race, religion, political beliefs. And to come back to the belief that I have long held, and this goes into the anarchist stuff, that everybody is equitable, everybody is equal, not the same. In fact, no two people are the same, but everybody is equal, and that everybody is an important, creative, intelligent human being. And that my job, and I don't get it right every day, my job is to treat them with dignity and honor them for who they are. And that's a never-ending challenge because I fall short, but that's that work. So if we're all coming at our lives treating everyone as an equal, then racism can't exist, because racism, anti-Semitism, the belief women can't be leaders, these things all come from hierarchical thinking,
Mm.
which is so implicit, embedded in our culture, that all of us, me included, grew up with it, and we don't even know it's happening. I tell the little anecdote in the book, in the pamphlet, which I didn't make up, but of the two fish swimming along, having a conversation, and one fish says, "Yeah, that guy, he's like a fish out of water," and the other fish goes, "What's water?"
Mm.
And that's really what I've come to realize hierarchical thinking is like, and it's so endemic that people unwittingly we just fall into it. So people say, like, what's the most important thing we need to know? What's the key element? What's the biggest mistake you've ever made? What's your biggest success? What's your proudest moment of your life? And I'm thinking, in hindsight, in a natural ecosystem model, why do I have to pick?
Mm.
There's no reason to rank them. The problem is when we're thinking hierarchically, then either I need to be better than you or you're better than me, because we can't really be on par, if that makes sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but that's the way we've been trained to think. And there's a second piece of this too, which I think is antithetical to true humility, and that's that we've been trained to hold the belief that we can assign an identity to a group of people. Women do this. You know how men are. And then it degenerates from there into, this is how Black people are. This is how Jews are. This is how Catholics are. And it's just, whether it's ill-intended or not, it creates what I would suggest is a dehumanization that's antithetical to true humility or humbleness.
Yes.
And so when you combine that kind of group assignment of identity with hierarchical thinking, it doesn't take you long to arrive at the conclusion that either my group's going to be better than yours, or yours is going to be better than mine. In a hierarchically minded world, who wants to be worse? Somebody has to be on the bottom. And so this thinking manifests in the US a lot through racism. It manifested in Nazi Germany and much of Europe for centuries in the treatment of Jews. There has to be somebody who's pushed to the bottom.
Yes.
And maybe it was women. It was traditionally women in the household. But the point is just to really come at it alternatively from a place of humility, of humbleness, where we treat everybody with dignity, where we're no better and no worse than anyone else.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I often think about birthright dignity, that everyone has that. And, if we begin there, then we create a whole different paradigm, right?
Absolutely. I wrote a piece about dignity over the summer, and I started to realize that's really one of the key metrics I would suggest of a healthy culture, whether it's at our business or in society at large. If everyone's treated with dignity, we're still going to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
But if I forget to call you back, but I treat you with dignity, you're gonna forgive me, and life's gonna go on.
Absolutely.
If I slip, but it comes from a dignity based relationship, we're going to be okay. So that's one big piece of current events. And then the other big piece is it's a pandemic, which no one alive has been through. And so humility would dictate that we would ask for help. Humility would dictate that we acknowledge that we don't really know what to do. Humility dictates that we understand our essential helplessness in the face of it, and then together come up with ways to start to address the issues at hand.
Yes.
But and I don't really per se want to get into politics, but if we have leadership that is not humble, then we flail around intellectually and emotionally trying to hide the problem, deny the problem, yell at the people who know more than we do so that we feel better about ourselves, et cetera, and none of that goes to finding quicker solutions that are more holistically sound. So I didn't think about either of those per se when I took on the challenge of learning about humility, but as you know, and I know, I mean, the horrible killings over the course of the spring and summer, which of course are not really new. I mean, as horrible as they are, we know it's been going on for centuries.
Right.
And certainly this is not the first time a leader acted unhumble in the face of a crisis, but we know that humility and humbleness leads to better outcomes that help more people. So
yeah, thank you, Ari. I want to just pause here just a moment, because what you have been addressing are complex. I'm not going to say complicated, but complex. I actually think that there's also simplicity in what you are talking about as well, because I think human beings at our best, we know how to collaborate. We know how to pull together.
Yeah.
We know how to be humble, and yet because of whatever power systems, hierarchy, whatever is in the air, we tend sometimes not to go into that place of humility, to deep humility. I I just have to tell you, I know you probably would not say this about yourself. Maybe I'm maybe too big of an assumption, but you strike me as a humble leader. And from the moment that I met you over email, and then when we had a COVID conversation, not a conversation about COVID, but outside with social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just wondering how you do what you do, managing a very sizable enterprise, a profitable enterprise, sustaining it over 4 decades. And you talked a little bit about an ecosystem. And
Mhm.
I wonder if you can just tell us about
Yeah.
that and how it connects to humility for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I spent a lot of years in therapy to learn to take a compliment, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Mercy.
Uh, there's no one thing to answer your question. I mean, really, I guess it's funny, but because we're here in an academic community, I get interview requests from students weekly.
Yeah.
I try to actually talk to all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have come to suggest that they do some reading from what I've written before they interview me, so I don't need to repeat all of the same stuff from scratch. But it's funny because they'll all ask me what's the most important thing, right? The hierarchical thinking. So the best answer I can give them now is the most important thing, or the best advice is to stop looking for the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the, there's many reasons why I have arrived at this ecosystem model, and it's still evolving. I started thinking about it back when I was working on part 4 of the Guide to Good Leading series, which I mentioned is about beliefs. As I studied beliefs, and it became ever clearer to me that all of our all of our behaviors, other than some instinctive reaction if somebody throws a rock at you or whatever, other than that, every action we take, including you and me being on this podcast together, the work that we do, how we relate to our significant others, the way we treat our colleagues or the person at the drugstore, all of that is based on our beliefs. And I started to realize that although no one really talks about those beliefs, or rarely talks about them, they are what underlies the actions. And so the image came into my head that the beliefs were very much akin to the root system of our lives. Uh, and that you couldn't see them, like I said, but what was happening above ground was always correlated. Alexander Berkman, the anarchist, once very helpfully for me said, "You can't grow a rose from a cactus seed." So I came to realize negative beliefs will always lead to negative outcomes.
Uh-huh.
You can make action and noise, as we've experienced nationally, but you can't really create healthy, positive outcomes except from positive beliefs. And that doesn't mean there's no problems, but you can have a negative belief about a problem, like we're victims, or you can have a positive belief, which is, this is horrible, it's a tragedy, it's terrible, let's get to work and try to do something about it. And then from there it grew, and I started to realize the culture was like the soil, because anybody who does agricultural work, and I'm a city kid, but I've been learning, and my girlfriend's a farmer, the soil's always what holistic farmers, sustainable farmers, organic farmers always talk about: feeding the soil, because when the soil's healthy, the plants are going to do better. And it's the same in organizations. So if you put you and me, with all due respect, on a 5-year tenure at a fast food franchise with a not super great franchisee, we're just going to be two more cynical people counting the minutes till we can get out of work. And it's not said disrespectfully to you or to me. It's just, if you're in an unhealthy soil, it's very difficult to sustain. And then it kept going, and hope started to appear as the sun, because we all go towards hope. I think you can see that, unfortunately, through behaviors of the last year on a political level. Even when the hope is negative or destructive in the long run, people still go, hopeless people will still, when hope comes for them, will go towards it. Spirit of generosity, I started to see like water, because nothing grows without it. Purpose, I started to see as air, because I was reading Rebecca Solnit, whose books I love. And she asked what I know she didn't invent, but I saw it in her book, so I give her credit, which is what goes faster uphill than downhill. And I had no clue. And the answer is wind. So I realized if wind or air is purpose, of course, when we're purpose driven, as you know from your own books and your teaching, we'll go work way harder at something difficult that we believe in than we will at something we don't believe in, even if it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the concept has continued to evolve, and now it's becoming clear that it's a whole book unto itself. So it's probably going to be part 5 in the series.
Yeah. Wow.
But I like it for many reasons. I think I have like 20 on my list, but just to give you one or two, it's not hierarchical, which we talked about earlier. Another thing is that everything impacts everything else. And so hierarchical thinking leads us to weight things out and to say, hey, the elephant is clearly way more important than the bee, because look how big the elephant is. And but of course, we start to learn that seemingly infinitesimal, statistically present things like bees have this enormous impact on the ecosystem. And when they're absent, you don't even notice if you're not a farmer or somebody who keeps bees, but all of a sudden we're not able to grow the fruit and grow the food that we need to grow. So in the ecosystem, the greeting that the host gives at the front door of Zingerman's Roadhouse could gain or lose us one of our most loyal customers.
Yes.
And who cares what I say, that smile or lack thereof, that energy, that or lack thereof. So all of that. And then also it's very important to understand that everything is impacting everything else. And so we had some guests last night at the Roadhouse who had never been there before. Their friend brought them. They're from New York. They were blown away by their meal. Well, I'm going to bet you they're going to end up spending way more money at our mail order over the next 10 years. And they went home with a coffee cake, and the guy's favorite food in his life is coffee cake. So our bakery is going to do well. So although they entered through the Roadhouse, the long-term impact might be really show up even more prominently in other parts of our organization. So when we understand that we're all related, and that how the dignity with which I treat you is impacting my own life, because if I treat you badly, it's going to manifest in the way I greet Tammy when she comes home from the farm tonight, et cetera. So all of those things are part of the ecosystem. And then the humbleness, as we talked about, is the humus, it's the topsoil. And out of that, as I wrote, you probably saw the piece a couple of weeks ago. Somebody asked me, and I didn't know the answer. What does humiliation mean? You didn't write about it in the pamphlet. And I'm like, you know what? You're right, I didn't. But she's like, well, did you do that on purpose? I'm like, not really. I just didn't think about it. So her question got me thinking, and I realized that humiliation, and it makes sense. I mean, in essence, it's taking the other person's topsoil. We're making it hard for you to be human by pushing you to be lower than us. And not shockingly, this is what human beings are doing to the planet. Topsoil is eroding, disappearing at an alarming rate, to the point that it's going to threaten our existence on the planet. And this comes also from humans, which includes all of us to some degree, treating nature as if we're better than nature rather than what's true. And I've come to understand, which I never understood as a kid growing up in Chicago, where asphalt was a comforting phenomenon, that we're part of nature, and that we have a responsibility, but we aren't better than anything in nature. We're just part of it.
Well, thank you. And I love your systems view and making it an ecosystem, which is pretty, it's hard for some people to understand. Like you said, you come from an asphalt arena. Yeah. And for those of us who are blessed to live in a world with old growth trees as a natural way of being and breathing, it's a little bit easier to understand. So thank you for writing. Ari, thank you for thinking, thank you for being, and thank you for breathing life into these ideas, these big ideas, and bringing them down to earth in a way that people can hold on to. And I want to ask you just a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, where do you find time to write? I mean, mercy. It seems like you have just so many, things going on, and your embrace is so wide. Where do you find the time to write?
I wrote an essay on time management in part 3 of the book, which is on managing ourselves. It's a whole, you can have me back and we can talk about time. But I came to realize that most of us have relatively unhealthy relationships with time. And that the way most Americans talk about time, not consciously, if they were to speak about their significant other like that all day,
Mm,
it wouldn't go well
mm-hmm,
because they're always mad, they're always frustrated,
mm-hmm.
they never appreciate it or rarely. And then I realized like it's people like I think about food all the time because I love it and I work with it, but I don't have eating disorders. I just like food and appreciate its beauty. And I'm fortunate that I can afford to eat good food. And I mean, I'm super wealthy, but I'm doing fine. And I am around good food all day. And I feel really fortunate for that. Many people don't have access to the healthful, wonderful, nutritious food that I do. But in the same way, I think it's true at time. And I guess I realized that Sam Keen, whose work you probably also know, is
Yes,
another wonderful, humble human being.
yes.
He said, we always make time for what we truly want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is true. Like I don't play golf at all, but I listen to, when we do Zing train work and I listen to whatever, I'm stereotyping, so I apologize, but whatever bankers, and they're like, I can't get in. I'm so behind. Da, da, da. And then what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I got 2 games of golf. I'm like, okay, so you got time to golf. I'm not judging it, but if you got time to golf, then you got time to write. So I think for me, it's just a conscious choice to put time into certain places, and the
Mm-hmm.
writing is not something I really ever set out to do. I just came to it really out of frustration, to be honest, with the way other people were writing our newsletter. And in hindsight, it wasn't their fault; it was mine.
Yes.
But the more I did it, the more I learned. The more I learned, the more I put that to work in the organization. The more it helped us as an organization. The more energy I felt because I was learning, and
Mm-hmm.
so it got me on a good cycle. So I just try to be mindful of my time and type fast and
Keep moving.
get over the perfectionism with which I grew up.
Yes, yes. That's really important when you write. So thank you, Ari. So my last question for now is, you've spoken a little bit about anarchism, and I would love to hear again in your own words, what is the relationship between what you
Mhm.
do, anarchism, and who
Yeah.
you are as well?
Well, I talk about anarchism because it's so misunderstood.
Okay. Mhm.
Anarchism is about respect for every individual. It's about
Mm,
freely choosing collaboration and generosity and
mhm,
positive beliefs. It's really a way of being. And anarchism is perceived to be chaos, but it's actually all about order. It's just that we freely choose order. And in hindsight, studying ecosystems and permaculture, I would actually say that permaculture is anarchism in nature and anarchism is permaculture for people, because all the same principles show up in both philosophies
mm,
about interconnectivity, about getting out of hierarchy, about treating everything and everybody with dignity and respect, about seeing the beauty and benefit that each person brings in their
mm,
own unique way.
mhm,
So what I this is a longer story, but as I started to restudy it 10 or 12 years ago, because I got asked to speak somewhere else at the Jewish Studies Department, and
mhm,
Deborah Dash Moore titled the talk Rye Bread and Anarchism, because I had just written a 10,000 word essay on the history of Jewish rye bread.
mm,
And she knew I had studied the anarchists, and I was getting, once again, I took the agreement to speak, but then I didn't. I'm like, man, I haven't looked at my books in 20 years. I mean, I'm going to look like an idiot in front of, like, these are professors who study this stuff, and I don't,
mm,
I'm way out of touch. So I got all my old books out and I started to restudy, and it totally blew me away
mm,
in a quick sense for 2 reasons. I had not realized how much what Paul and I and everyone around us had created was aligned with a lot of those anarchist beliefs that I hadn't consciously done, but it
mm,
was happening anyway. And then B, even more importantly, uh, it just totally hit me upside the head is how much what's now called progressive business was aligned with anarchist thinking. So
mm, mm,
getting out of hierarchy, self organizing work teams,
mm,
flattening organizations, engagement.
mm,
These are
mm.
all, take away the business speak. It's all anarchist stuff that was being written about 100 years ago, because
Yes.
anarchism came as a reaction to the dehumanization of the Industrial Revolution.
Ah.
It's the same, although Many of them did not deal with race very well at the time, but it's the same dehumanization that was done that justified racism and hierarchical thinking around the made up concept of race, which of course is a whole nother subject that and teach very beautifully about. So it really, I started to realize that all of this stuff you and I have been talking about for the last hour, treating everyone with dignity, positive beliefs, including everybody actively, these are all the themes of progressive life in organizations, and they're all themes that are embedded in anarchism. And interestingly, Gustav Landauer, who's an anarchist whose work I never read in school because at the time it was only in German, which I'm afraid I'm not able to read, but it was translated about 15 years ago by a guy named Gabriel Kuhn, which allowed me to read it. And it's wonderfully inspiring stuff. He was a good friend of Martin Buber's. He was a pacifist, very spiritual guy. He said many interesting things, but one that totally blew me away is he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, the people who pursue the destruction of the state, which is a common theme in anarchist conversations, he said, it's misguided, because when you're trying to destroy the state, you're locked in a relationship with it in the same way that I was locked in a relationship with my mother while arguing with her and refusing to do what she wanted. But in hindsight, it was completely reactive. And so, although it felt like I was freeing myself, it's really freedom from, which is a very unfree way to be.
Right.
And Landauer said the answer is not to destroy anything, it's to go and create free communities where people can learn to treat each other with dignity, to think freely, et cetera. And when I read that, I was like, oh man, that's what we're doing. And the last quote, and I'll leave you alone, is Landauer said, which really helped me understand. He said, we have no political beliefs. We have beliefs against politics. And that made me realize that anarchism is not a political program. It's not about taking power. It's the opposite. It's a way of life. And it starts with how I treat you, how I treat Tammy, how I treat myself, so that it's not about gaining power. It's about being powerful in a humble way within ourselves. So yes. It starts with us, and it starts with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Ari, again, for being my guest on this podcast, for who you are, because that's where your leadership comes from, and all that you do in the world at Zingerman's and in the community. I just have such high regard and respect for who you are and just all that you bring. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way. And one day I'm going to get out to Seattle or hear you on stage and see you at work. You got to see a tiny bit of what I do, but I look forward to more conversations to come. And thank you so much for the honor of being on the show.
So inspiring. Clearly, Ari is a leader's leader. He makes a difference in his own life and in the lives of so many others in his own family and throughout the world in his work as the CEO of Zingerman's Community of Businesses. And as I mentioned earlier, Ari was voted one of the world's top 10 CEOs by Inc. magazine. Now you know why. They lead differently, all of them, including Ari. They lead in a totally unique way. To learn more about Ari's work with the Zingerman's Community of Businesses, you can go to this website. That's www.zingermans.com. www.zingermans.com. And when you go to that site, just be sure to scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on About Us. And you can learn all about Zingerman's vast community of businesses, and you can take a peek at their array of offerings. And hey, why don't you just shop while you're online, right? Just shop right there while you're there. If you're just joining us, I'm Dr. Gloria, and this is Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. We just heard from my very special guest, Ari Weinzweig, CEO of Zingerman's Community of Businesses. Now, if you want to make your life count, if you want to be the change you seek, be sure to listen to this episode again and again. And be sure to tell somebody. You can find me right here on iTunes, Audible, Alexa, SoundCloud, iHeart, TuneIn, Spreaker.com, Talk Network Radio, and so many other places. Now, before I close, I just want to give a shout out to all the women, men, and young people all around the world, because you know what? We are the ones. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. That means that you don't want to wait for somebody else to step up and make things happen, right? You want to be able to do that for yourself. You can be the one. In fact, you are the one. You are the one who can make a difference in your own life so that you can make a difference in the lives of others. Now, if you happen to miss any part of this week's episode or last week's, you can simply download the recording and listen to it at your convenience at talknetworkradio.com/hosts/legacy living. You can find me and learn more about my work and Legacy Living Make Your Life Count by visiting the Gloria Burgess website or by visiting me on LinkedIn or Facebook. And that's facebook.com/Dr. Gloria Burgess, PhD. You can also find me on the TEDx site and listen to one of my TED Talks. Just type in my name to find me there. Before I close today, I want to thank each one of you for tuning in, for allowing me to share a bit about my journey with what legacy living is all about. Not just living and learning, but living, learning, and serving so that you make a difference in your own life and in the lives of others. It's about being on purpose every single day, 365, 24/7. Legacy living is a powerful way to make your life count. Once again, thank you for joining me for today's show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Burgess, and this is Legacy Living Make Your Life Count. Please join me again next time right here on Talk Network Radio for another episode of Legacy Living Make Your Life Count. Don't just count the days in your life. Make the days in your life count. That's what legacy living is all about. Have a fantastic day, and remember, make the days in your life count. God bless. That's our show today. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Burgess. I hope you'll join me again next time. Until then, don't just count the days in your life. Make the days in your life count. That's what legacy living is all about. Here's to you. Have a fantastic day, and be sure to make it a yes kind of day. Remember to celebrate the music of your life. Make the days in your life count.